Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So tonight's speaker is the creator of one of our favorite podcasts, the Move Your DNA podcast. So we are especially honored to be hosting her here at Health Essentials. Aside from her running an award-winning podcast and blog, she's also a biomechanist and an author of 8 books, several of them bestsellers. She also has educated hundreds and thousands of people on how movement works on a cellular level and the role that movement plays in the body and in the world. So please help me welcome Katy Bowman.
Thank you for having me, Lynn, again, and all of Health Essentials and everyone who came. I'll go over here. Sorry. I was just going to lounge against this, let it hold me up for a little while. I'm tired. So just so I know, how many people have never heard me speak or like really don't know any of the content that I'm going to talk about? Like half. Okay. I will start at the beginning then, and I'll move quickly through. My name's Katy. I'm a biomechanist. Biomechanics is the science of applying Newtonian physics to living systems. So things like pressures and gravity, how all that affects living systems. That's what I'm interested in. It's what I'm interested in how movement works. And then after doing that for a very long time, I've been in the movement field for almost 22 years now, and I spent a lot of time teaching movement and figuring out how movement works within a body. But we have kind of 2 issues going on right now in our culture that we share, which would be a lack of movement overall. Like, so has anyone ever heard that they need to move more? That they should move? They should move more. Movement is good for you. Movement is medicine. All these things. We've heard them. And I was asked this question by someone who's regularly on a big scale telling people to move more. And then she said, what am I actually telling people to do? Like, when I say move more, what are they supposed to do with that? Because I know that they're supposed to move more, but I don't really know what that means. So I think about that all of the time, because movement is not only how it works in the sense of, what attaches where and what flexes what and what burns this many calories and what type of exercise gets you this kind of result. There's also a lot of data or research going on surrounding why don't people move? How can we get more people to move? What are the barriers to movement? Because the idea that we need to move, the ideas and the data that our health would be better if we moved, billions of dollars of research saying if you could just move a little bit more, here's the risks that would go down for you, and yet people aren't moving more. So maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, I started thinking about not only how movement works as far as the lever systems, but more, I started to really think about how does sedentarism work then? Because movement is a very natural human phenomenon. It's a natural phenomenon throughout all living things on the planet. I mean, we're moving right now really fast. There are these physical laws that are going on all the time. Plant life grows up from the ground. This whole thing that we're in is extremely dynamic. Yet, we have this ability for some reason to be very inert despite not having that ability for as far back as you can look at all the humans that came before us. And when you kind of look peripherally at other humans, they're not able to be sedentary. So then I was like, okay, I think that I need to apply, like, what are the mechanics of sedentarism? So if we're trying to solve the question of why don't people move more, then we have to think about, like, well, how is it possible? Like, what makes it possible? If movement from a historical perspective is how we got food, how we got water, how we got safe in a shelter away from things, how we found mates, how we were able to move from place to place. Like, that's all on. A friend of mine was talking about the spine of culture, which I thought was a really beautiful, from an anatomy geek like myself, visual. Like, he thinks food is the spine of culture, and I'd agree. And I'd also say movement is the spine of culture, because you can't really separate food from movement, because those two things have always been inseparable, but they're somewhat separated now. So I wrote a book called Movement Matters.
We can turn it on.
Oh, I was like, I don't know what happened.
It's not going to stay on.
Oh, is it just keep going down?
Yeah.
Well, don't turn on yet. Don't worry about it right now. I'll just.
Brady has the magic wand.
Okay, so I'll just go.
And it's on.
Maestro. Okay. So I wrote a book called Movement Matters, and it was like a year in my life of really exploring this idea of when did we stop moving? Why did we stop moving? How was that even possible given that we have to actually move to make transactions of things? And it was the first time that I really started looking at, I don't know, maybe the mechanics of a culture. So it was, I still felt like I had one foot in the physical sciences, but then like another foot in the social sciences at the same time. Because while they're separate, of course, nothing is ever really separate. They're always influencing each other. So this was where I started to explore the idea of humans being separate from nature. Now, we can't ever really be separate from nature, so then that required lots of definitions of like, well, what is nature then, etc., which I'll get to in a second. But I had always looked at a set of movements, well, not always. I started studying movement where most people start studying movement in this culture, like academically, which is at university. And the bulk of the university perspective of movement comes from, according to the textbooks, which I've said before, which is there's 3 types of human movement, which are dance, fitness, and athletics. Now, of course, there are many human movements that are not any of these 3, but yet that was the perspective really of the culture of the people creating the curriculum. And so when I had always just thought of like, oh, your knees and your hips have this capacity, because that's what was in my textbooks. But as I got farther along in my career, I started looking at cross-cultural data. So it's like, oh, well, here's how this culture behaves, but that's not really how all cultures behave. So you start pulling in other human experiences that are different than mine and yours, and maybe any that were researched at universities. And then you start to see that the story shifts a little bit. So I got interested in what I call like ancestral movements or natural human movements. And they were the movements that you would find throughout all human communities all the way up into this point in general. And of course, just like the food and terrain is local to whatever region, so the movements would be as well. Like if you don't have people near water, you wouldn't likely see paddling show up. But for people who had lived in an area with water where there was food under that water, likely would be that you'd have swimming movements and paddling movements, but you wouldn't necessarily see that in other areas. So it's not to say that these are all the movements full stop, but no matter what your particular region or land would require your movement be, you'd always find things like walking, but unshod walking over uneven and varied terrain, long distance walking, which I consider to be a separate phenomenon than maybe short distance walking, squatting, carrying, clambering, climbing, and then there's other things like vocalizations. So there was this idea that these are like ancestral movements. And then it started to occur to me that ancestral movements is not really a great term, given that many people on the planet still today do these movements. So there's kind of this understanding in paleo communities or ancestral health communities that these were the practices of humans a long time ago versus modern humans. But in fact, you will still find many modern humans doing the bulk of these ancestral movements. So I was really identifying just something that my culture didn't do as something of yesteryear or belonging to humans of a different time rather than humans in a different situation or place. So I was interested in what was the relationship between the separation of movement from the needs of life. Like if movement has facilitated almost every human need, then how is it that we have so many of our needs met except for movement? And in Movement Matters, that's when I kind of called on this idea called movement outsourcing. The fact that most of the movements that we do for the needs that we have is outsourced, either to other people or through technologies that we've created that have rendered those motions unnecessary. But we still need those movements in our body because the rate at which we've been able to outsource is extremely short in the human timeline. So our physiology still requires quite a bit of those motions because those motions are like the anatomy of our body, in the same way that I would consider electricity to be in the anatomy of a working television set. So that's where I am very liberal with the term anatomy. To me, anatomy are all the parts that go into a working thing. So if you would accept that electricity would be part of a working television, even though it's invisible, but yet it's still measurable through different tools, then I would say too that movement, not only movement full stop, but a certain distribution of movement types is part of the anatomy of a working human body. And that we're so great at tinkering that we've been able to create lots of things that move us or move for us to still meet some of those needs. But we haven't been able to tinker our need completely out of movement, because movement is still going to be on the list of almost every ailment out there. It's going to be listed in what reduces your risk for getting that, or what helps reduce the symptoms or the strain of having whatever it is that you have. Movement is still usually in the top 3 wishes everyone has. If you were to take out a piece of paper and write what you could have more of, what would it be? For most people, movement as exercise is going to be in the top 2. So not only is it a need still here, it's a longing for so many, but yet there's still this big block to doing it. So I started to think, then there's some perception that we have over the value of convenience, over the value of having all the non-movement things that we want over the movement. So again, in Movement Matters was in time I introduced this concept that what if we reframe the idea of convenience as not saves time, but saves motion? That everything that you do for convenience didn't really buy you any extra time, because at the end of the day, you still needed all the movement. So now you just pushed all the movement requirement to the end of the day, and now there's no more actual time space for it. So all you did was save movement through it. So I started introducing things like stacks. So I'm going to talk about stacks in a second. You don't have to turn on yet. I'm going to do that at least 3 more times. I have like a really way of, I'm talking in a picture in my head right now, so I'm like moving around a circle. I'm coming around to it. Who's familiar with permaculture? Wow, you're very proud to be perm. Like, you know permaculture. Yeah. Okay, so permaculture is an idea in, I don't know if I have to put it in agriculture, in the science of growing things, in the approach to growing things, which looks at, and actually permaculture is not only growing principles, it can also be social principles. It's the idea that if you observe ecosystems, flourishing ecosystems, long-term successful ecosystems, you'll see principles that are there of getting something done. And if you can model the ecosystem that you're trying to create after a very successful long-term ecosystem, which nature has many of those in, you're likely to create something more sustainable and efficient. I'm not quite sure how efficiency is defined, but in general, that you'll get the thing that you want with more ease for a longer period of time. You don't have to work so hard to get the thing. So all these things kind of came into my life at the same time. Also, so did having children after being a long time mover. It was easy for me to move because 1, I liked it, and 2, I had no real job, and I had no children, and I had no spouse, and I had no pets, had no mortgage, and you'd be amazed how much exercise I could fit into my life when you loved it. But I just kind of watched a slow whittle of all the extra time that I had as I added on all these responsibilities. And I would say I'm a pretty quick observer and integrator. So it didn't take me very long, when your midwife hands you like, make sure you do all these exercises for a healthy birth. And I was like, this is like 14 exercises I'm supposed to do every day. And I've got all this other stuff to do. And at that point, and I had already been working for like 10 years with people, helping them with their knees and their ankles and their hips, people who've been completely sedentary out of preference, and people who've been complete Olympian athletes out of preference, and they still have these same immobilities. And I had just been like, okay, here's a range of motion. Everything was like degrees. You're going to move through these degrees and through these degrees at this angle. And like, it wasn't related to anything. It was just do these, because you can get these, you can kind of hack your way. If you move it at this angle so many times, this fiber over here is going to grow up, and that's going to hold this bone in place. And then you'll do it over here. And that was fine, except by the time you think of all the fibers that you have and all of the angles that you need to do, you're looking at like 17 hours every single day just to move all of those fibers. And so I was like, and I don't like to feel like a failure, but I was realizing like this approach, I'm gonna fail every single day. So I was like, I'm gonna stop sitting on my couch, because all the time I'm sitting on my couch is time, not because I'm sitting, but because I can't get my butt any lower than the couch when I'm sitting on it. And part of this list of things I'm supposed to do every day to be healthy and a good person includes getting my hip up over here. And so I was like, well, I'm just gonna then go all the way down to the floor and done. And I was gonna go sit down anyway, so why not just sit 18 inches lower than I was gonna sit? And I checked off 2 things. And that's when I started to realize like, oh, exercise is the solution that a completely sedentary culture has come up with to meet their movement need. In the same way that we've come up with vitamins, minerals, packaged foods, and I realize like I'm saying everything that's downstairs and those things are all but it's because it's easier to hack a solution. So we're going to talk about hacks in a second, not yet. It's easier to create a solution moving forward than it is to usually reverse out of a habit, or maybe those minerals aren't available in these foods anymore and it's only available to put them in this way because of the lifestyle elements, like or the elements of the culture that we're not willing to let go, because it's our collection of like what life is or what are the right things. So I'm going to ask that you try not to get too mad at me in this evening, because I am talking, there's a lot of counterculture, it's a lot of pressure. So it's like, my first intention is always to do no harm, and that's mostly on your psyche. But I am going to ask that you move, and that's going to be not necessarily your body tonight, but your mind a little bit around these ideas of how do we recognize that our lives are constantly being engineered by choice for less movement, and then how do we choose to put that back in as inconvenient as we might think of it at first. So that's when I came in with stacks, not hacks.
Just press the key.
Oh, you want me to do it now?
Oh. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I'm just kidding.
0, 0, 0. It's actually a really good password. Of course it is. Oh yeah. Oh, has. Okay, good. I've already been talking for 20 minutes. Okay, here's the other question we needed to ask real fast. I didn't. Who wants their book signed? Okay, we're just trying to scale it with time. Okay, we have plenty of time. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to explain. I'm going to do hopefully a good job explaining how I use stacks and hacks. Poor job explaining, how they are in permaculture. But like, if everyone had to make a list of things that they have to do in their life, I sat down and made a list of mine. Like, there's my work obligation. These are all these circles here. Like, if I if I were being honest kind of about all the needs in my life and where I put my time out of obligation or desire, it's like work always gets the 8 hours, or sometimes 12, 8 to 12. And then family, when I see the 2 hours of my family next to the 8 hours of work, that makes me feel sad. An hour of exercise, an hour of something in a community, 2 hours spent learning. I had small kids, so it would be like, this would be outside of just family time, but time where I'm supposed to be facilitating learning experiences either for others or for myself. An hour of fun, also sad number for Katie. But if you could think of what these circles are for you, the way that we're used to approaching them, because I believe that because everything has like been slowly separated away from a very integrated culture, we now approach these as different periods of time. So I was struggling because I liked to move a lot. I also liked my kids a lot. I also needed to go to work, and I liked my work a lot. So I was just having a hard time making sure only one thing was happening at a period of time. Like again, it was back to I was failing every day because I was never actually getting all of these hours in, because there's this other thing called Facebook, and that gives a lot of hours. So slowly, I just was trying to figure out how that in nature, these things don't happen in isolation. In nature, and in nature, when I say I mean in nature, I'm gonna right now say like in a system that has very little human altered things like we have now, is what I'll call nature, even though this is to nature, would be how do I meet all of these needs at the same time? And so the example that I gave in Movement Matters, I'll give to you now. It came from a day where I had not moved. I had worked a lot, but had not moved very much. And then I had these kids like that I wanted to be with. And then I have also like eating. Food should be on here too. Like to me, it's like an inordinate amount of time I spent thinking about procuring food, creating food, and then of course cleaning up after food. Like that's like 17 hours every day. And so I was like, we're gonna go on a walk. We're gonna go on a walk, and we're gonna go on a walk. And I know where there's an apple tree. And we're gonna walk to this apple tree. It's like 1.5 miles away. We'll walk to the apple tree and we'll get apples because they're gonna be hungry when they get there. And so I just created this excursion. And this excursion took us a very long time. It took like 3 or 4 hours because they were little. I think they were maybe like 1.5 and 3 at the time, or 2 and 3. And it was fine. And there's another one on here too that's been more recent, and that's nature. Has anyone heard of vitamin N and the big movement for vitamin N? It's usually written about for children, but they're finding the benefits for goldeners, and then of course anyone who wants stress reduction, which is just, oh, go be by a tree. They call it green space. Like it has a technical name. Go to a green space and bathe in the forest, and here's what's happening, which is in Move Your DNA. And so now, like, to be well, you're supposed to do all of these things. To be well and a functional part of society, you're supposed to be able to do all of these things. So I did this big walk, and we ended up being outside for 4 hours in nature, right? We got a total of maybe 2 or 3 miles, and I was, because of my exercise mindset, a 3-year-old paced walk didn't register as meeting my movement requirement. Because I had been completely trained to devalue 4 hours of walking. I walked for 4 hours. But that doesn't count, right? Because it's what's the fitness pace? The fitness pace is 100 steps per minute, and the cardio should be this. And so everything slow and abundant has been devalued as actually counting towards this exercise, because usually those recommendations are coming given that you will only do something for 30 minutes or 1 hour, and trying to pick out, well, like, what's the hierarchy of the best tissue that we can hit, We met our neighbors along the way. I ended up getting like a squash and a whole bunch of other produce as you would just meet, because there was your neighbors that I had never met because I had never walked between them. And I was like, oh, like this is a much more in nature example of like, I have to take my kids with me everywhere I go. But they too get the benefit of that 4-hour walk and the training of getting to go. And we climb the tree. They learned the knowledge of where the tree is and what's edible. And then there was other edible things along the way. So it's not only the school, it's the nature-based content and the things that eventually turn into environmental stewardship and knowing your place. And so I just was able, and I got food, like I was making up food for dinner later on, so I didn't have to drive to the grocery store. So what normally would have taken me 6 or 7 or 8 separate hours, where I was usually having to then source childcare or change my clothes or have to drive, it saved me 3 car trips. And so I just realized over time, years, I was like, oh, the lack of movement is really where so many of the other issues that we're trying to solve, everyone's got different ones that they're figuring are more important to them. But I just kept coming back to it's like really hard to find an issue where movement wasn't the piece that, if you could get to it, would mitigate some of the other things. So this is stacking. Stacking is, well, first let me talk what a hack is. Does anyone know what a hack is? I didn't really see the word hack too much outside of like the computer group. But then I started seeing biohacks, like hack your house, hack this and hack that. And I think in general, the idea of a hack is inelegant a word? It's like it could tend to be sometimes an inelegant solution or a jerry-rigged solution, often using pieces not really related to that thing to bring them over here to fix it. When you see hack now, it usually involves some sort of advance in technology that creates a shortcut to get the thing. But shortcut doesn't usually count the cost of the technology itself, the time that goes into it, or what's been extracted to create the technology. It just means that the thing that you personally get when you use the technology is shorter than when you didn't. A stack is usually like, so a hack is going forward technologically speaking, more development, more creation, more ingenuity. A stack is usually going backwards, taking the technology out of the thing, where you are doing more of the thing yourself. It usually is slower from one perspective, but more is going on in the one period of time. And that's common in permaculture. They'll talk about stacking functions, and a very quick explanation that I'll give of hacking would be farming. Like what it used to take to get food. Like you'd like walk through and find it, stumble it. There's a lot of wisdom and movement involved to discover where it was, to keep following it. But farming was kind of a way to use less movement to still get the food that you wanted. And then a lot of ingenuity went into creating systems where you could grow, but not everything was easy to grow, so you saw loss of diversity there to get the few things that would grow. And of course, now where we are with what's called monoculture, that's much different than the farming that was done, well, my grandparents were farmers, and there was not only their crop, but all of their other crops. But then the 4,000 years and the 10,000 years before that, farming looked much different than what it does now. But farming often involves like creating rows. Why rows? It usually means that you have to do less movement, right? Like that you can put everything exactly where it is. You can be more efficient, so less movement. But then you have to bring in a lot of things from the outside. You're often having to bring, because you clear it all to make it less troublesome, which means less movement to move over and under and through. And so then you have to bring in water, and then you have to bring in fertilizer, and then after you've used that soil and then the work to clean it, you have to bring in things to heal that soil. And so it saves a lot of movement on one hand, but many new tasks were created over here that each have their own systems of energy that goes into creating those, or that goes into facilitating what seemed like an easy thing at the time. Permaculture is more like, well, if you don't clear out all of the trees, then you're going to have more shade naturally. And so if you can change the shape of where you're growing it, everything's not in a row but maybe around, then when things fall from the trees, they break down there and they help retain the water, so you're not actually having to bring water in anymore. They're trying to work with natural systems because, of course, the food that we're trying to grow used to occur naturally, not all clumped together easy where you could move less to go get it, and where humans as a whole could then congregate and stay in one place. You'd have to move around quite a bit, quite complexly, to find the bulk of what you needed. But you were always exchanging. Like I always say, like movement was the original commodity, because anything that you got, you were paying for in your movement. But then slowly over time, we found ways we found new commerce systems, and we found ways of getting the thing without as much movement from ourselves. So I'm just I talk a lot about stacks, and the stacking ideas that I have to give are fairly simple. It's little things like, if you look at your kitchen, everyone have a kitchen here? Yeah, okay, almost everyone. So you go to your kitchen. What you might not know until you go home is you've probably arranged your kitchen so that it affords as little movement as possible. The things that you hardly ever move go into the hardest to the reach sections, in the bowels of the hardest to reach sections, because you're never going to use it. The things that you use most often, you put where you have to hardly move for them at all. And so our whole lives are set up that way. But if you just look at your kitchen, what I did to stack was like, I'm already going to be in my kitchen. I'm already washing the dishes. I'm already putting them away. I'm already getting them out. So I'm going to put them in the place that requires the most movement for my body. So all of my plates and my dishes go down here low, and all the ingredients that I use multiple times a day go up really high. Now this doesn't seem like a big deal, but you would be surprised. We could probably calculate those moves in the millions of dollars and what therapy costs are to teach people how to do that with a therapist in a building designed specifically to do that. So that's what I'm talking about, the extensions, the systems that grow off of these things. Like we've lost these like really simple motions, and so when I hear like, Katy, that's like the dumbest, like really like that's a big thing. It's like, but when you go in to do, like sometimes this is what you're doing. This is what I'll give people, and what therapists will give people oftentimes when their elbow, because they never did that, or because they only do that, stops feeling good when they do that, right? So it's just like that kind of system. So our stacks involve rethinking our lives and try to figure out what would be like the more movement-rich version of this. So date night is another big one that I have. Sorry if this was your date night. You know what? My husband and I both like a lot of movement, but then we're like sitting at a restaurant going to a movie. We're like, why are we doing this? We both love hiking 8 miles or being out in nature more than we like this movie. But it's just like the movie and the dinner or the thing is this like the habit of what you go to. So we just stopped that and we started date hike. And date hikes were amazing because when we left it, we had met so many more needs than the needs of the date. Like there was the connection that was going on, that would be a stack. But then there was also the both of us, you know, had 2 hours of the nature time. We had 2 hours of the movement time. But then it ended up being like even more richer because it's moving with another person is more than just you getting your own workout, right? Like it's modeling. It's like, I want to try what you're doing, or appreciation. Like, I can't believe you can do that. That's amazing. So it ended up actually being bigger when it was stacked than when it was unstacked. Children's birthday parties. I'm trying to like do the things that almost everyone is going to have to encounter. Holidays. Come over, sit down, eat a lot, and then go sit down when you're done. And then we'll get up and we'll run around, but then we'll come back and sit down. So I was like, okay, well, what would a dynamic holiday look like? Okay, well, it would look like, and we're going to start off with a standing soup course. And then we're going to go take a walk, and we're going to gather the stuff that you're stressing over to decorate your table with before, you know, and because, you know, you want everyone to feel good for the holiday except for you. You're going to like run around. I know, you can relate to that, right? Like to be like, we're going to go out, we're going to harvest this together, and we're going to build this, and then we're going to come back in. So it was life not looking like it always had looked like, but it looked more movement rich. And so just lots of things like, I get a lot of questions of going, I'd love to stack my life, but I live in this land like most people, as do I, this 8 hours a day. So many people come home from work and then like sit down for that meal. After being inside and sitting down all day, the culturally appropriate thing to do is come in and continue to sit down, like for the good of your family. So I thought, well, having 2 little kids and not wanting to sit down, I was like, what if we packed some great food? And then what if we like did a walk, like a dinner hike? Or what if we just even went to a place outside to eat it? And again, we got the nature time and the movement time and just the change of scenery. So like that's how I hack. It's real, or stack. It's just taking a situation, and we can talk through some of them if you're like, well, how would I do this or that? And to think about what are ways to put movement back into the things that all used to require movement. They all used to require movement. Kitchen. If you look at the foods that you buy, have you ever bought like baby carrots that are already pre-cut? Or, I mean, so many things are manually processed now. And also the grip strength of everyone is like slowly going down. And it's just like it's just a cultural phenomenon where you're just seeing a slow outsourcing and a slow, like, why wouldn't you buy the easier thing? Why wouldn't you buy the thing that's already been through a machine or people? I have a picture of a woman standing who's grading those carrots in a factory that's all closed up, and that's her job, is to peel carrots, and she's standing on a pile of carrot peels this high. But we don't think that, like when we go buy the thing. So that was the other thing, is oftentimes there's people behind all of the work that we've outsourced. Not only do you want the work back, like you want the work back, you're struggling to fit it in all these ways. So that's stacking. The kitchen is a big one, because again, remember, movement and food, the spine of a culture. And when all of your food is rid of its movement, like if you no longer find it, grow it, cut it, process it, mash it, you know, you've got huge muscles here that have just been masticating forever, and now it's all just blended in a green smoothie. You get more. And meanwhile, you know, everyone's needing a ton of like work in this area, so we've got more systems employed to deal with the ramifications of not moving here, but it's faster. But it's not necessarily faster when you add up all the things that you have to do, because the movement wasn't put into the anatomy of your body, of your day, of your life. So questions. I'm gonna take a sip. You take the time to raise a hand. Really? Yeah.
Is it okay to eat and move at the same time? As long as you don't choke yourself.
Yeah. Like, you mean, do you have to be still to eat?
Well, you mentioned going on a hike. And
Oh, yeah.
Taking the meal with you. So that's a great, because our family does a lot of that.
Yeah.
So, like, if we're eating while we're walking or moving, is that okay versus sitting and being calm or stationary?
I don't know. I guess I don't know what like okay means. I imagine that people have kind of eaten on the move for a long period of time, and also sat to consume food for a portion of the time, that both of those are okay to do. I think it's different than the idea of like sit down and pay attention to your food. I mean, these are things I think that have come down from people wolfing down their food without paying attention. But especially if you add an element of movement to your food, you don't have to eat like as you walk necessarily. You can walk to a place, and like we'll do, have you ever had progressive dinner? Yeah. You know, so it's like kind of like that, a twist on the progressive dinner, but we'll often do courses along the way. So when you want to rest, I have a small family, so it's easier. Like, we'll walk here, first food break, have a seat, but then get back up and keep walking. So it's not necessarily that you have to walk and eat at the same time, is that you're taking your food out on the go, and you're welcome to sit still if you want to. But I kind of snack, if you've ever hiked and snacked and eaten at the same time. So as far as ill health effects, I think it's okay, as long as you don't choke, yeah? Yeah. Then again, like people are eating in recliners, like that's a big thing. So is it okay? Like that's also, you know. I think you've got a lot of later, but I think it's okay. Yeah. And if you want a mindful practice, like if you've been working really hard on a mindful practice around your food, then you can sit down and be like, where does this food come from? What was the movement that went into this food? Oh, it's a this? Okay, well, what do you think, who do you think did that? Like as far as part of our unschooling thing, it's a lot of, where do you think this comes from? You rip off a piece of aluminum foil, do you know where that comes from? It comes from the earth. Who's in charge of getting that? What's their life like right now? As we just rip, oh, that was too small, get another one. So we think that there's a lot of ways to put mindfulness and food together that doesn't have to necessarily be super sedentary. Yeah.
Almost everyone I know can't even get into any kind of squat position.
Sure.
So putting things on the bottom shelf, how do you suggest talking to someone who might not understand where one might be coming from when they want to put the plates on the bottom shelf?
Well, and so it's interesting because the context of my hacks, knock, stacks goes into, and it's not hacksness, it's both. But that concept, I think of my body of work as one big thing. So if you're gonna even think that, in dynamic aging, you'll see a whole list of all kinds of ways to make your life more movement rich. Don't take the drive-through if you don't have to, because chances are you wanted to see a smile on someone's face today, to hear and to practice standing and moving around, carrying your weight, and to maybe hear other people's voices who share your community with you. That is always oh, and is bending or knee pain a thing? Here's 3 or 4 things to work on for that. So very rarely would I advance someone to put all your stuff down low without also maybe even giving them just leave your stuff where it is. You just move this around right here while you do that. So I put the correctives there too. Are you a trainer, where you're helping them do it, or are you just talking about your family?
A family.
And your friends, did she make you do that? Did she tell you to put all your stuff down low?
I can do squats like you would.
All right. Yeah. So, you can give, if someone said, I can't bend to do that, then, is there a couple ways that you can bend? But yeah, usually there's, because we are not movement rich, people can't, I think, sometimes even imagine what the movement to get there would look like. Yeah. So that's where movement modeling comes in and movement correction. Correction isn't the right word. It's how do you move right now? Kind of observe, and I'm going to give you some new movements to try. That's all exercise training and therapy is getting you to kind of move some parts that you never really moved before and see how you were moving. And then it's changeable. That's a big one. Yeah. Hello.
First I want to say you inspired me with the kind of hack stuff, so stack stuff. My car door opener.
Fob.
Yeah, it ran out of batteries about 9 months ago. And I never got it fixed, and so I have to walk around the car every time and do that movement. And sometimes when you're putting something in the trunk or in the passenger seat, I still got to walk around to the driver's seat and key, open that, and go back. So that's a little thing that I've embraced in my day to keep me turning and going around the car.
Yeah. Well, and there's just so many people who just sent little notes going, I used to think of the very thing that I'm doing right now as horrible and happening to me, and now I just see it as wow, how great. It's the same scenario, the same movement. The only thing that's different is the perception, which was, oh yeah, I wanted to move. Oh yeah, look, an opportunity to move that I didn't have to pay for, drive to, didn't have to fit in this box. And it's just your mind. The only thing that's changed is your mind. So really, all I can help you shift is your mindset to say, no, really, the movement that you wanted is all around you for easy harvesting. Maybe not easy in the sense of how it feels at first to be so unpracticed at the movement. It's not easy in the sense that it feels easy to suddenly become really physical after generations of not being physical, and not necessarily your generation, but even generations before you. Reclaiming work that maybe has been not modeled for you for years, generations, again. I think that's my favorite thing, because it's doesn't require money, doesn't require a major shift of anything. It's just that psyche work.
Save me.
And I saved you not to buy a battery. Save someone else making a battery.
So speaking of the car, I'm trying to implement ways when I'm driving. I don't do as much of it as I used to kind of incorporate better movement. I work on my posture in the car and stuff like that. Now this is kind of a side question, but have you heard of this thing called Jawzercise?
Like working out your mouth.
Like a chew toy for humans.
I think that's great. I think it's great because so I always put the caveat, as long as it doesn't distract you from driving, because my brother thought he would do the head hang while he was waiting at a stoplight, didn't realize he had taken his foot off, and it was nothing, it was a little bump, but I'm not really do your exercises in your car. That being said, chewing in your car, if you can drive and chew gum at the same time, then you're clear to use the Jawzercise. But I sit on an Alzheimer's panel, a women's Alzheimer's panel, and so there's a lot of data coming out about the work of the jaw and the circulation to the brain. Now, jaw work has been outsourced from us. This is what I'm talking about, for generations. A mill was invented by the time all of you were chewing, and probably your grandparents, which means the bulk of mastication, and it's not only mastication, it's the fact that one of our primary tools used to be our teeth. Tools. Now it's don't do anything with your jaw because you might break your teeth. But back then that's your tool set that you have. You want to have a knife on your pocket and teeth in your mouth, and you can open anything. So if you've got very strong jaw, maybe not us right here. There's a very great video of, I think it's at the Polynesian Cultural Center. You can find it where the guy's just opening and ripping off a green husk of coconut. Just, pearly white, huge jaw, because they've always done that, right? So they have that mastication. So there's you look for trends in health issues within certain populations, and when you see changes in health statuses, and then you look at changes in practices, chewing is a big one that's been outsourced with the invention of mills, like grain mills and things, where you're not doing that anymore. And then, of course, the smoothie has kind of come in and been the new thing, which maybe, I don't know if our grandparents were drinking smoothies per se, really, really cooked soft food. So I'll often recommend getting your chompers back slowly. I do not recommend jumping to the peel of coconut with your teeth in, but and also chew sticks. They're finding chew sticks in populations that use chew sticks, and it can be the tree that they're using as well, or have much fewer caries than when they compare them to the same population when they give them a toothbrushing and flossing thing. That the chewing, whether it's the compound or the action or both, of the chew sticks. So there are chew sticks that you can get. You don't necessarily have to buy a Jawzerciser. And I always recommend, like a beef jerky or a dehydrated mango, something where you're tearing and ripping. Make sure you use both sides of your mouth if you can, and then create a jaw workout. You could do that while you're driving. You can eat in the car. You can work your jaw out in the car. But no, I haven't seen it. What is it? Rubber?
Yeah, I think it's a sort of medical grade silicone, and it's a ball that you get different densities.
Hack. That's a hack.
Yeah.
A stack would be choosing foods that require you to work your jaw more.
Eat a steak.
What's that?
Eat a steak.
Yeah. Chew it 20 times on each side of your mouth. But you see the difference between a hack and a stack? They figured out that and then maybe look at jaws that just never do it. Muscles, just my neck gets tense all the time too, but I also don't use my arms that much. Jaws get very tense. We don't use them that much. So the hack is coming up with a new technology, new factory, new harvest, new packaging, new commercial to meet the need that food could meet if you would just choose to eat something differently. Stack. Yeah.
Just on that note, just from following you, and on the jaw thing,
Yeah.
family, you posted something about that you just give your kids big hunks of vegetables.
Yeah.
So they can use their jaws, and I was like, oh my
terrible
gosh, I'm
parent.
sitting here chopping up
Yeah.
into little tiny pieces
Yeah.
for my kids, and we started just putting whole carrots in, and they like it better. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's again, that's just one of those things, I want, what are we doing? It's aesthetic, and it's maybe easier, but again, it's less. We have the time now because of whatever other movement we've outsourced to, chop their carrots for them into pieces, and it's not to say anything about that, it's just to say that a lot of that is just unnecessary. It's just unnecessary. And I feel like there's a lot of stress all the time in all the work that we have to do all the things. And I mean, I think I took a picture the other day, like all I had was I just put the carrot, and I was like, I don't have anything else. Like, this is all I could muster is just a carrot for you right now. And it has like dirt on it. Like, if you want to wash it off, you can wipe it off on your own. Like, just, yeah. Whole food is great. And then they start losing teeth though. And then you have to change the food, because the food that you used to go, and they're like, I can't eat the apple anymore. I'm like, oh, yeah, you'll have to move to the side. Use your cat. Your cat. The cats have like the little saw on one side. Use your cat teeth. Any more hex deck?
So does that mean utensils are a hack as well?
Are utensils a hack? Like to distance yourself from the food? Well, I think of a hack as like a solution. Like I always think of like a hack as like a solution to the problem. Like, what would the problem be with utensils?
Dirty hands.
Yeah, dirty hands, or maybe.
So instead of using a knife to cut open a pepper, I use my fingers and my hands to do it. No,
I don't know.
I'm just. Yeah, that's just. I don't know if that's putting movement back in, but not using utensils.
Yeah, just take it in the bowl in Japan. They just pick up a bowl and drink it that way. Yeah.
You eat with your hands in India, so.
Oh, a lot of cultures still eat with their hands, yeah, or hand. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things I think just have like, whimsy isn't the word. There's usually some, I think, utilitarian reason, but there's many things we do culturally that it'd be interesting to track down the roots of where they are, like chairs. You know, they made it into some culture, but not other cultures, and it's not because we like to take rest more than other people. There's something about the shape of that chair and the height of that chair that was important to the culture that created it, and then it became part of our culture, but then also our constant posturing, and then of course the things that come from it. So yeah, it was definitely about getting up off of the ground over, other people were still on the ground.
You have chairs in your house?
So another stack. So I told you about when I was pregnant, and we still had furniture at that time, but I just saw like the exercises that I'm giving people to do that they're trying to fit in. I can do that to somebody by getting on the floor. And then when my water broke, I was sitting on the couch, so we sold it right after that. Or donated it. But no, so that's one way I've stacked my home, is to get rid of seats. And it's not really seats. I mean, the floor is the seat. It's because the height of the chair that you're sitting in has been the height of the thing that you've been sitting in almost your entire life, just like all the steps are the standard height. So what happens is our bodies all just kind of adjust to the fact that that's the range of motion over which you've used your joints. So if you just always if you went to a trainer who gave you, curls to this height, there would be a physiological adaptation, and the same is in our ankles, knees, and hips. Like, that's just what we've done. And so just like anyone wanting to eat better, I wanted to move better, so I just got rid of the things where I had to manufacture will. Like, again, manufacturing willpower is kind of an unnatural thing. That is the thing when we've created like all that we want to have, and then someone said, and really that thing is not, you can have it, but it's not necessarily going to get you to where you also want to go. And so every day you're going through thousands of choices of like, I know I should, and your brain is just full of should, not, terrible person, like all the time. Like, that's just going on all the time. I don't like that. I don't like that feeling. And I realized that I could focus on not calling myself a terrible person, or I could focus on just not having to have the choice to just get to the place that I wanted to go, and I just got rid of seats. Now, do I have furniture? Yes. I have art and rugs and cushions and things of various sizes. I have a bench with a cushion on it for people who don't feel like getting up and down off the floor. But I always say too, because that's a common question, it's like, well, what do you do when people come over who can't get up and down? It's like, well, we have an area for them to use, but more often than not, the person that thought they couldn't get up and down tried one time because there was an environment that facilitated it. So when all the environments facilitate them not needing to do it, it's also the environment that says, and maybe you shouldn't, maybe you can't, or whatever. So like our environment is just like, I think it really signals you are free to move here. And we'll help you with whatever, and as cushy as you need it to be, or whatever arms you need, that we can do that. So, and I'm a fan of classrooms moving to that as well. That you have, like, you've got some movement sovereignty that's not necessarily being acknowledged or respected or facilitated.
I find it interesting, I've been reading a lot of books about hunter-gatherers, and I find it interesting that a lot of the same information comes up. They only really worked for food about 4 or 5 hours a day, and they had more leisure time than the agrarian cultures that came after them. So in many ways, I think it's a myth to think that it was harder to get food. They had, more diversity of movement, like you're saying.
Yeah.
They had more diversity of food because they're foraging for wild foods to change with the seasons, and they had more leisure time on top of that. So I think this whole striving for convenience is actually a bit of a myth. In the end, you had been becoming more inconvenient. Like you're saying, you have to come back around and fix things that got messed up along the way.
Yeah, again, it's just like the perspective. If you look really close, you save time as you pan out. You didn't really save that much after all. And I think that's the is it a paradox? I think it's a paradox where we've never moved less and we've never really rested less or relaxed less. So with all that movement that we're not doing, it seems to be like lots of stress and tension at the same time, where if you have cultures, and that range is going to, I mean, obviously it depends on the season and where you live and the period of time in which you live, but especially here, the tribes, this area was such a rich, abundant area in terms of food availability. Like, there wasn't persistence hunting here. Like, there was just spawning salmon out and letting them dry. You know what I mean? Like, it was much easier here, but what do you get when you have that? You get art, right? Art is that sign of leisure. Art is that sign of, you don't have anything else to do to tend to yourself today. What else would you like to do, because it's free time? So we don't really, I mean, to get my food now requires 12 hours of work a day, and none of it is facilitating any of the other things that I need. So it's interesting to go, yeah, maybe we actually do need to rest more, but what is rest now? For many, rest has become a screen. And screens are particularly stimulating to many different systems. So our rest is not even of the same quality. So I think that rest is going to eventually need to be defined as not using your arms and legs. Like, can you just stare at a fire? Like, can you do nothing? Like, these are also skills that many people are now going to a class to learn how to do nothing, right? Like, the hack is now to come up with, tell me and teach me how I do nothing. And that's become a whole philosophy of a thing. So like we figured out, like humans I just think are amazing. We figured out the needs. What we haven't figured out is like that they used to all occur simultaneously, that they don't have to occur in series, because the more you add in series, you can't add hours or time. So you're limited by the time-space continuum, at least right now, while we think that way. And so as we keep going along with the scientific process and figuring out more things that human needs, and not any other way to change a society to provide more space for the things that we need. In fact, maybe the other way, it's like going to the point where you have even less, you have more time to meet the basic, maybe financial or societal needs, then you just see everyone's meeting their needs just going down and down. Which is of course sparking more ingenuity in things like nature classrooms and nature schools and green spaces and rooftop gardens. But basically what we're doing is we're just putting the nature back onto this structure. So we're getting there. I think we'll get there too. The question is, can we be more proactive about it, literally and figuratively? Yeah.
So as a student, I spend many hours a day forced into like a little small spot, looking down, writing for many hours. Do you have any ideas on how to stack that situation? Or people who work in a desk that can't be a standing desk?
Yeah. That can't be a standing desk?
Well, I couldn't have a standing desk in a classroom.
Yeah. So I wrote a whole book on work. It's called Don't Just Sit There. It's like taking all this and applying it for someone who's in a work environment, whether it's school or like a traditional 8-hour sedentary environment. The first thing is, if that is your case, to make sure that you're maximizing your movement before and after that period of time in that day, on the weekends and on vacations. Because I think what happens is we only see the part that we have no control over and then are actually making any changes in all the parts that we can control. So for the 8-hour day, the first thing I say is, what does your morning look like? Are you getting up and you're moving earlier, like getting things circulating and going before you go into that period of time? And if you have a hard time waking up early, I always like to say that going to bed early is sleeping in on the other side. And then, and if you can't do it, just get up at like 5:30, 2 days in a row, and you'll like be asleep as you need to. And then afterwards, to when you get off, to watch your tendencies towards I'm just gonna relax with Netflix. I'm gonna go, because you do have to turn your brain off after work or after school. But we're so used to turning it off with rest of basically a mental distraction, rather than moving your body to get your brain to come down. So use movement as a conduit for rest, especially if you've been resting physically all day long. And then look at your weekends, are you picking moving activities? And not necessarily, that's when I always work out, but can you go somewhere 4 or 6 hours, and can you do all your chores on foot on one day so that you end up walking 6 to 8 hours, where then it makes more sense for those 8-hour periods to be restful. And of course, vacations, are you picking dynamic vacations, or are you picking sedentary vacations if you have the privilege of having vacation time? But then getting to that 8-hour day, do you actually have to be seated and in place? Does it make sense? Is it permissible to ask for, I consider them dynamic workstations, which means, are they adjustable in some way? Could you sit on the floor cross-legged? Because I think that's the thing, is you can be dynamic, moving, changing position, and still be in place, in front of a desk, in front of something that you're writing with. Doesn't mean that you have to be completely still. We tend to drop into one position and then do our time in that position. But you usually have, again, I call it sovereignty, freedom. You have the ability to usually shift your position without having to change locations. So play with that a little bit of going, okay, I know I have to sit here at my desk and type, but do I always sit in the same way? Is my one leg always up in one way? Can I shift it? And just so you're actually trying to stay moving, even if it's minutely, within your bout of being still on the computer or in a classroom. And of course, always, you don't have to be disruptive. And then I'm always trying to meet the needs of the individuals, but I'm also trying to help inform the culture. So you'll see a standing room sign back there on the wall that they put up here. I create signs like this because I think that we are not great at communicating that movement is okay here. It's so culturally, you totally stand out if you're the mover. And we tend to feel that people who are moving or doing anything that we'd like to do but aren't are obnoxious. And so I think you can feel the weight of people thinking that you're obnoxious, especially when you're trying to care for yourself in a way that other people would like to but can't figure out how to do it yet. So I would encourage, if you're in a classroom, to say, here's all the data on why chairs and blah, blah, blah. But would you mind, just because I think it'd make the whole class feel better, if we created a standing area or a fidget area, and communicate it in that way. You'd be surprised how many people would be like, oh yeah, if you want to stand in the back or if you want to sit on the floor, that's fine. And if it would make you feel less obnoxious if someone would post a sign that it was okay, that'd be great. I take the ferry back and forth. There's a lot of people sitting on the ferry. And then there's one group of 4 that's always walking on the ferry. And then I saw last year someone put up a sign that said 12 laps on the ferry is 1 mile. Walking is okay. No money, mimeograph. I just said mimeograph. because my principal from 1978 made it. No, so just a photocopy of something, giving permission And what that does is it diffuses anyone who feels upset that someone else is moving, when clearly it would be more respectful if you would just sit down and be still. And then of course parents and grandparents can watch that messaging and that expectation, because it's so easy, even me, to go just sit down and be respectful or be quiet or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, it's just really deeply ingrained that to be still is again to be good, or to, you know, to facilitate everyone else's expectation. So you just negotiate that all the time. So hopefully that was helpful. That's all. Okay, I don't have that much time, right? Yeah? Roya.
You're an hour and 5 in,
So I have
25 minutes.
Oh, okay, I have 25 minutes. Okay, great.
By 9:30.
Right, so then I'll do signing. There's not too many people that said they wanted signing, so. Any more questions, or I can go to sign? Yeah.
You're getting me to think of, I have a 6 and a 4-year-old, and when do you think it would be appropriate, because I hear about parents, the convenience of making meals or the stress of making meals, is that if you got the kid to participate sooner, cut up their own vegetables, or choose or whatever. Like I even, because the kids like apples, is that we live close enough to the grocery store that tell them to go, not tell them, but go with them to the grocery store and go pick an apple, walk home, and then eat it, versus buying 10 and then just go home. So for me, I'm thinking of ways to get them to participate younger, so that I don't have the stress of like that all the time. Right. On the weekend 3 times a day, 4 times a day.
I know. I can hear it in your voice, and I'm there too. And it's gonna go on forever. There's like 14 more years of this. So that that's a big thing. That's another thing. I read a book on my only parenting book was hunter-gatherer childhoods. And kids start with their knife skills, and it's just a book of research on that. I mean, it covers everything from grief and loss to siblings, other siblings coming in, and food and all these cool things. It's just an interesting read. Kids and knives started very early for us, and there's just there's a way to facilitate it. And at the same time, there's just this understanding that injuries are a natural way of learning, and we have really come to the point of stripping all potential injuries out, and with it, all of the learning. And what happens, then you get the adaptations of people who are. I was even thinking too. I used to ride. This is a total aside. I'll get to yours, but I just think it's fresh observation in my mind, so it's in the forefront. I used to sit up in the front of my grandmother's car, and I learned how to drive by watching her. I mean, I remember memorizing the stick shift, what you did when you put into reverse, all these things. I was learning to drive for 14 years before I ever drove. All of that observation and knowledge. And now now everyone's in the back with entertainment. And so they're relatively speaking, their skill set, they'll do the same driver's training that I did, because that's the hack, the facilitation of it. But all of those years of learning the flow of cars and there's a lot of discussion really about the next generations coming up, and so we just have to really look at that relationship between when is safety a liability? On what scale will that perspective, I think, set in? So I was just thinking wow, because I was in New Zealand where everything's a little bit different than America. I'm not sure what it's like here, but I was like, oh yeah, I had to learn on the other side of the car. But I had been observing my husband for a month before I tried, and I was like, well, I feel fine now because I got all of that learning done. So it was just, anyway, that was a total aside. Sorry for wasting your time. Anyway, so, but it was to that point where I think that it would be someone would freak out at the thought of giving a child a knife. But it's there's so many ways to easily facilitate that. And then meanwhile, we have people with grip issues and needing mobility issues. But then I always thought, but then you've got bigger hanging skills. You've got gross motor and then fine motor and the relationship to each other, and sewing and needles. My kid weed whacks. My 7-year-old does all of our weed whacking and lawn mowing now, just as I used to drive the forklift when I was 8. That's just, and you get the safety goggles. You can make it more safe, but I just think that there's a confidence and then a skill set that comes when you are allowed to be on your edge versus always kept like, or really shy of the edge. Kids cooking, I think, is extremely stacked. Kids choosing what they're gonna make, and I feel like if kids like grow or harvest what they make, they'll always eat it more so than if you buy it. Like that's a weird phenomenon. Things that they would never touch otherwise if they grow it. Oh sure, I love this. Like fish that they catch, the wolf down, fish that comes from some other place they don't know, suspect, you know, or what, like that's just my kids. So it's just really interesting to see. And I wonder if there's a natural mechanism of the more I understand it and know it, the safer I feel with it, the less other people are eating it or whatever, the more like I'm going to say no like 12 times before I say yes. Let them cook. Let them cook. And you know how to manage, I would say, the safety of it to a scale, but yeah, start letting them do that. Like, so if you want numbers, I think they are both chopping by 2. I think it's because I read in Jared Diamond's that all kids like had a hatchet by 2 or 3, and they also had cuts, you know, and they have knife skills. The kids go to nature school, knife skills, and you know, didn't cut through his fingernail and his finger doing it, but only once. And like that's we are in a time where it's never been like safer to cut yourself and never more averse to letting one actually cut themselves. So.
What was the name of that book? The Hunter-Gatherer Parents?
Hunter-Gatherer Childhoods. Yeah. It's a good one. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention something. The city of Victoria, they allow you to pick from all of the fruit trees that's on their land. So if it's on City of Victoria land, you can pick it. It's awesome. In Canada, we can't just pick everything from the wild, so that's one of the things we can do.
Pick everything from the wild?
Wild.
Oh, the wild.
We're not allowed to like take from natural parks and stuff here, like you are in the States.
Well, we're not allowed to take from parks either. You can't harvest in a park. You can harvest in forest.
Yeah.
But not within
There's
park
certain
areas.
places you can, but like it's all
no picking. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like an interesting time. There's never been more people. Like it's a delicate balance and try to figure it out. That's why I encourage everyone to grow something. If you're not growing something and you even have a pot to start growing, like a little space, start growing something, because it really is going to take everyone like doing some even tiny movement for their food, just a little bit. You know, get excited, get skilled. It takes 20 years to get knowledge to do it, but start now. Start anywhere. Yeah.
How do you begin to change people's perception on, because I have a number of clients who I will try and teach them how to stack their lives or whatever, but they do it once and it's uncomfortable and then they'll never do it again. Or while they're in my office, they're like, yeah, that's really cool, it's a great idea. But they never do it. Like, how do you...
Well, for me, I assume that it's never anyone's intention to stack their life. Or, you know, like, I don't think that most people pursue wellness for the sake of, like, optimal wellness. So, for me, like, why are they coming to your office? What's your...
I'm a massage therapist.
Okay, so massage therapist. So, you know, a lot of times people just want to feel better. They're like, I just want to feel better. And it's like, so I always try to, like, if I could create, like, a movement ad lib, it would be like, my movement is keeping me from what? Or my lack of movement is keeping... It has to relate to something that brings them joy in their life. And it's probably not movement. Maybe for you, definitely for me. But for most people, to be able to move more is not the reason to start moving.
That tends to be like what our conversation is.
Yes.
Like they
right.
want to be able to move more and they want to be able to do these things.
Right.
So then I like...
But pick a thing. So like, so that's the training thing. The training, the way that you know that you're getting better, I think, can no longer be how many reps, how much weight, what was your time, what's your angle of degrees. It's like, how many minutes did you do the thing? Or like figure out whatever the steps are from the thing and make that the movement evaluation. Because if it's not relating back to this, you're not going to see adherence. Mm-hmm. Because then it's like, it's not getting me any closer to the thing. So I would have, like, that would be the technicality, is like you'd have to pick a stack that related to the thing.
That's what I try and do, and then they're like, yeah, cool, that's such a good idea.
Well,
it's just like...
we all have our own road to walk. I mean, like, at the end, it's just, everyone's got to do it for themselves. It's tough. It's tough when you're someone who's like, it is frustrating. You're like, just do the thing.
See me every week.
Do you have kids yet?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is like everyone has their own thing. It is challenging when they're asking for help and not taking it, but then I always just go, but they're coming back, so somewhere something is growing, and that's okay. They'll do it when they're ready. Yeah. But then but if you're fatiguing yourself inside because of the thoughts, you could just let that go. Like, don't have to be frustrated. Just go like this. Go, where am I not stacking my life that I could do more? And then once you do that, then other people will magically start stacking around you because it's all connected. All right, I'm going to sign some books unless you have a question. One more?
I have one.
Yes.
Mostly two. I think like I usually have the same problem at my work, but sometimes like I try to ask the person what do they do a lot of, and then something that they move a lot if they're not seeing it as movement, and then we just like celebrate the hell out of that.
Yeah.
So like get on board.
Yeah.
Or like coffee, like a lot of people drink coffee, and so there's like a lot of like drinking coffee like this. So like if you can find one thing and be like, if they're coming because their neck always hurts, it's like, well, I'm going to give you an exercise that you'll do every time you drink, just one tiny thing. Most people will do it. Like if they can just observe themselves once, it's just really hard to see yourself behaving. That's the hardest thing to see, is how you actually behave. So even though you've said to look at it, it would require me looking at it to see it. But if I can get a glimpse of it, then I'll see it over. Like, have you ever learned a new word and then all of a sudden you realize that everyone just started using that word that day? It's the same thing. Like once they can see it, they'll always see it, and then they'll always correct it. So just find that one thing. Okay, I'll go downstairs and sign books. Thank you all for coming.